Well, for more on Stanley's life and legacy, let's bring in Imani Cheers. Imani is the executive director at the Global Media Project. She's also an assistant professor at George Washington University. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So as we heard this, Stanley talked about his legacy being about whether the story survives. How do you think Stanley and his stories will be remembered?
He is a legend, as are his characters, and he's going to be remembered for someone who always really fought for and strived for the underdog. And I think that's what's so important is his characters resonated with so many people who felt marginalized in communities, who felt marginalized in society, and he was able to bring about a humanity that connected with millions and millions of people.
And it's interesting because there really is something about seeing yourself represented in a positive or empowering light, and especially when you're made to feel so much smaller or invisible, like you don't matter in the real world. So talk about Stanley's contributions when it comes to inclusion and diversity on screen.
It's so important to note what he was doing, and at a time when, in all fairness, that a lot of people were doing. To take the comics to create a character such as Black Panther in the 1960s, to not be afraid to talk about issues of bigotry and racism openly, and to be such an advocate for inclusiveness, which we don't see. To create characters that, as I mentioned, really spoke to individuals who were feeling left out, who were feeling isolated, and to be able to draw that human pull out of that, and to make it so that it resonated with everyone is such a unique characteristic. And we hadn't seen that in comics before, and I don't think we're going to see it ever again. We truly lost a legend, someone who was doing things and had been for 6 decades of work that we just haven't seen.
And it's interesting because when people think about comic books, you think of, you know, these young kids back in the day reading them, but now you have these huge blockbuster movies.
Oh my gosh,
Talk about the impact of how Marvel kind of grew into this blockbuster and what that does for a new generation of Marvel fans.
I think for someone like myself who had the opportunity to read comics as a child, it wasn't my main source. I was much more into novels, but is where I first learned to read. I would sit with my grandfather and I would read comics because they were short stories, so to speak. And it was really, really amazing to see where Marvel could take a strip or a comic book and take it to the blockbuster level. So introducing it to a global audience, these characters that for the most part were very traditionally American, even Black Panther, right? But we have these things that, these conversations around these larger issues. One of my favorite characters outside of Black Panther is Spider-Man. And I love Spider-Man. He was a photojournalist, which is also close to my heart, but someone who had depth and complexity, and he could talk about issues. I mean, he was a teenager, right? He was in high school, and to sort of the angst of teenage life that was able to come across and resonate with so many people across gender, across race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. There's very few mediums that have been able to do that the way comics have, and also the way Stan Lee did.
It's interesting that his first and most beloved character was this kind of unassuming young guy who kind of was thrust into the limelight.
Absolutely.
And when you look at social media and the sort of pressures that kids are under, and even adults, how important is that to really see that narrative of seeing yourself differently?
Oh, so important. Individuality is key. If you look at it sort of a theme throughout many of his characters and the work that he has, the legacy that he's left, is that we see people for aspects of their humanity. We see them for their individuality. It's important to stick out and not to be a part of the group in a pack, which is something that everyone needs, especially young people, where you're so encouraged to sort of join the crowd. All of his characters stood out from it. And everyone from Ant-Man to Thor, you have this wide variety of characters that was able to and is currently still inspiring people to embrace their individuality, to embrace their differences, and realize that their differences make them unique and not outcasts. And even if you are an outcast in a situation, you can still be powerful and loved and embraced.
Now, as we look at Marvel itself, we know that obviously the films have dominated the box office, and some directors like James Cameron, might be a little bit of hating, is saying that basically audiences have superhero fatigue. Do you think that's true?
I definitely know they don't have superhero fatigue when it comes to things like Black Panther. They're eagerly anticipating the sequel. And, you know, it's interesting for someone who doesn't necessarily write comic books or direct comic book related films. I think it's interesting to make that note. But there are a lot. I will not, you know, let's be honest. We know that there's a lot. But at the same time, people really enjoy going to the movies and escaping from everyday realities. And when you can put yourself into a superhero universe and spend, you know, 90 minutes to sometimes a lot longer, 2.5 hours or so, embraced and engulfed in these worlds, it's a nice escape. And so on the one hand, yes, there might be fatigue, but a lot of people are looking for entertainment value that takes them away from sort of the everyday woes of life and society, and that gives them hope. And the reality is with a lot of Stan Lee's characters that there's hope. Hope is also one of the main things, and we need a lot of that right now.
And we certainly see that when it comes to his global impact. Some people may not know that Stan Lee was a first-generation American born of Romanian Jewish immigrants who came to this country. And he has always voiced his opposition against things like bigotry and racism, and really believed in understanding and honoring people's differences. Why do you think, especially when it comes to a global audience, that that's something that we may see Marvel continue to do in the future?
I really hope they continue to highlight that, because we are seeing increasingly ideas of nationalism and where we're looking at you know, ideas of America first and only, and immigrants aren't welcome. And to have a franchise and an organization that is really built and created by an immigrant, right? But then also wanting to support inclusivity and support differences. We truly need that, because it's kind of the one place where people from all differences and nationalities, ethnicities, languages can come together and celebrate one another versus focusing on our differences. So I hope Marvel sticks with it. And for Stan Lee's legacy, I'm sure that they will.
A deep loss indeed. Thank you so much. Always good to have you on.
Thank you.
Imani Cheers there, Executive Director of Global Media Project.